we can go back into hell and see if we can find more merch opportunities, to see if we can find more drink recipes, more rides for amusement park. I know it's been a minute. Does anybody remember where we last were?
I want to say we're like Canto
Is 10.
11.
Yeah, we're on 11.
Look at me, genius.
We got numbers. That's good. The previous episode, before last episode, it had just entered into the city of Dis, which was filled with all of these mausoleums where all of the heretics just like existed, being burned forever. And then on Judgment Day, they get locked in their tombs on fire for the rest of eternity. In the previous canto, Dante actually gets to talk to some of these heretics and has some, here we're going more into the really specific political history that we talked about in our original like background info. And so Dante talks to a couple people. Dante talks to, I believe, Farinata and the father of one of his buds, Murat. What are their names? I forget. So Farinata was one of the
boys.
Ghibellines. So he was one of the people that thought that the Pope should have more power. Or no, that thought the Holy Roman Emperor should have more power and be able to take control away from the Pope. And then, so he and Dante have a really like chill bros being bros conversation about politics and about how they respect each other mutually, even though they don't have the same political beliefs. And just kind of talk about the future. And Dante learns, the reason, like, I cannot find out the immediate future from any of these dudes chilling in hell because they can't see the immediate future. It gets clouded. They're like farsighted when it comes to future sight. They talk about a whole bunch of stuff. And then there's also this guy who, I can't remember the dude's name, one of Dante's buds who was, eventually Dante was instrumental in getting him kicked out of Florence and felt really bad about it. His dad is down there, chilling in a tomb. He comes out and he's like, hey, what's going on? Why are you here and not my son? My son's way cooler than you. And Dante's like, well, if your son's not here, it's because God didn't love him that much. And dude's like, what do you mean didn't? My son's dead. And then he like falls down to the floor crying and then like crawls back into his tomb. And Dante's like,
sorry.
Okay. And then he goes back to talking.
Anyway.
And then at the end, Dante's like, hey, Farinata, you know that dude that I was like, didn't correct him when he thought his son was dead? Could you just let him know his son's not dead and it's fine? Like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And so, like, in this chapter, we get to hear a little bit more of Dante's political beliefs. We get to hear a little bit more of Dante's, like, theological beliefs. We get to see some interesting facts about Judgment Day. We get to see how Dante thinks that people in hell are able to tell the distant future, but not the close future. We get to see a lot of Dante's inner, justifications of why his book is perfect and makes perfect sense and nobody challenged him on anything and there are no plot holes. Don't worry about it. And then Dante and Virgil have a little chat about all of that stuff. And Virgil's like, well, don't worry, because we're also going to get you to heaven. And when you go to heaven, like, they know everything. They don't have to worry about the stuff. So just wait, be patient. And then let's go. And then they walk down to a stinky gutter. Now they like continue walking and there's like this really smelly trench that they're walking towards. And that's where we are in Canto 11.
Gotcha. Can you imagine if someone were like, sorry, my future vision is a little bit far side.
It's like, that's convenient. All right, that's great.
Yeah.
Imagine you go into a mystic or one of those called psychic. It's like, I can tell you what your great grandson's gonna be. It's like, that's fucking cool.
But if you go to like, a lot of psychics or tarot readers or whatever, they're like, I can't tell you specifics about what's going to happen this year, but I can tell you like generally the kinds of things that will happen and like
200 years.
Things that might happen in the distant future. And like a lot of people will say things like that because they know like it's less verifiable, right. But also because like, it's easier to kind of change things and adapt them and make them fit with a certain narrative if we're a little bit more vague about it. But if you're like, oh, like next week you're going to like get stuck behind a garbage truck on your way to work, it's like, well, I can easily tell if that's true or not. And if it's not true, then I'm never coming back to this tarot reader, right?
Right. Which is taking a good chance. I just kind of like the idea that even in hell, these people are trying to con Dante.
No, I think it's pretty much like Dante's trying to con us.
There's that too.
There's a reason. There's a reason I'm not making predictions that can be proven untrue.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say it. It's Parson. Pretty convenient, Dante.
All right. So the title of Inferno 11 is the Sixth Circle Heresy, which is where we've been for the last couple chapters, and the distribution of the damned and the Inferno. Upon the utmost verge of a high bank formed in a circle by great broken rocks, we came upon a still more cruel pack. And there, by reason of the horrible excess of stench the deep abyss exhales, for shelter we withdrew behind the lid of a large tomb, whereon I saw a scroll which said, Pope Anastasius first contain, whom out of the right way Photinus drew.
Our going down from here must be delayed, so that our sense may first get used a little to this foul blast. We shall not mind it then.
The teacher thus, and I.
Find thou therefore some compensation, lest our time be lost.
And he to me.
See how I think of this. My son, within these rocks,
He then began.
are 3 small circles which, from grade to grade, are similar to those thou leavest now. Full of accursed spirits are they all, but that hereafter sight alone suffice thee. Hear how, and wherefore they are packed together. Of all wrongdoing which in heaven wins, hate injustice is the end, and each such end aggrieves by either violence or fraud. But whereas fraud is man's peculiar evil, God hates it most. Therefore, the fraudulent are down below, and greater pain assails them. All the first circle holds the violent, but since against 3 persons force is used, its shape divides it into 3 great rings. Both against God, one's neighbor, and oneself may force be used. Against themselves, I mean. And what is theirs, as clearly shown, thou'lt hear. By force, both death and painful wounds are given one's neighbor, and thereby his property is ruined, burned, and by extortions robbed. The first ring, hence, torments in separate troops all homicides and those that smite with malice, spoilers of property and highway robbers. Upon oneself may one lay violent hands, and on one's goods. Hence, in the second ring, must needs repentant be without avail. Whoever of your world deprives himself, gambles away and dissipates his means, and weepeth there where he should joyfully be. Against God may force be used, by wittingly denying that he is, by blasphemy, and by disprising nature and his goodness. And therefore, with its mark, the lesser ring sealeth both Sodom and Cahors, and him who, speaking from his heart, despises God. And fraud, whereby all consciences are bitten, one may employ against a man who trusts him, and against a man who storeth up no trust. This latter kind of fraud would seem to kill only the bond of love, which nature makes. Hence, in the second circle must there nest hypocrisy, and flatteries, and workers of magic, coining, theft and simony, panders and grafters, and such filth as these. In the other way forgotten is the love which nature makes,
Oh. Ooh.
and that which afterward is joined thereto, whence special trust is born. Hence, in the smallest ring, where the universe its center hath, and on which Dis is seated, whoe'er betrays is spent eternally.
You are a fucking champion. I am so proud of you. That was so much.
Like to agree with you.
Awesome. All right. Obviously, there's a lot of content here. Virgil just monologues for a straight minute. So basically, they're coming down into this stinky trench, and Virgil's like, it smells so bad here. We've got to let our noses adjust. Like, let's just like sit here and get used to the smell so that we can continue on. Because if we don't get used to it, we're not going to be able to keep going. And Dante's like, well, I don't want to just sit here though. So should we do something? And Virgil's like, okay, all right. See these like jagged rocks over here? And then he like gets out his like teacher pointer stick and like starts doing a whole lesson on the structure of the rest of the hell. So he's like, all right, look at these rocks. See how they're in rings, and there's like 3 rings here. All right. So you know how like we came down through these rings. You like go in a circle, you like go down. It's kind of like a funnel shape. We're about to go into some of the deeper circles of hell. And before we go there, Dante wants to make it really, really clear why he's structured hell the way that he's structured it, and be really explicit about how he sees all of these different sins in relation to each other, and why he thinks that fraud is the deepest circle of hell. So he basically says, all right, so first we got the rings of violence, and then we've got the rings of fraud. The reason why God hates fraud above everything else is because God's light and God's truth are so important. And fraud is that thing that violence deprives people of their physical self. Violence deprives people of their physical belongings. But fraud deprives people of their emotional and spiritual being. Fraud affects people in an emotional way, which is much worse than hurting people's physical being, because people's souls are so much more important than their bodies, because the soul is eternal. God hates liars. God hates those who defraud others, because those people are taking what is natural and good, which is man's ability to trust their fellow man, and people's ability to trust each other, and people's ability to build relationships, which is like the whole deal. Like the whole thing that God is about is like loving each other and making society and like getting to heaven and all this stuff. And it completely destroys that, and it completely it works against all of the things that are so important to God. So, well, in reality, a big reason why Dante puts fraud in the bottom circle, fraud against people that we trust, is because he got kicked out of Florence by the Pope that he trusted, and he was really mad about that. And so he's like really salty and wants the Pope to go like all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
Also has a really good point here where, if you're thinking about this in the context of Christianity, you're thinking about, well, what's more important, my mortal body or my immortal soul? Makes sense that crimes against the immortal soul and crimes against people's, immortal being are punished more brutally than just the physical crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So then Virgil breaks it down even more. Virgil says, so, all right, we've got crimes of violence. Those are broken down into 3 rings. So there's like 3 sub rings in the violence sector. So there's crimes against yourself, violence against oneself. So if you waste your money and squander it, you gamble it away, or you spend it on things that you don't need, if you do things that hurt yourself, if you do things that if you're self-sabotaging, all of those things, anything that you do against yourself, that's this first ring. Like, it sucks, but at least you're the only one being hurt. Second ring is violence against other people. And while, we might think of things like murdering other people as, violence against other people, it's not just that. It's also like if you steal from people because you're, violently depriving them of their belongings, if you, hurt other people or don't care about other people's, physical well-being, like all this stuff. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's punished in the circle, and it's kind of interesting because they're subdividing it into different categories, but they're not necessarily subdividing those categories of like, this was a really bad thing that you did, and this was like a not quite so bad. Like, if you're a highway robber and you like robbed one person and stole some money so that you could feed your family versus if you murdered somebody in cold blood just because you thought it was fun. Like there's not really a distinction there. And then after that violence against other people, there's violence against God. So blasphemers, people that fight against the church, people that, anybody that does anything that like is violent towards God, which is really interesting because God doesn't have a physical being in the world. But like we can see from Virgil's monologue, long monologue, how we're defining violence against God. After we get through those violent rings, then there's fraud. And there's fraud also against, so fraud is broken up into two sectors. There's fraud against people that, the only reason that we should trust each other is because we're both humans. You should be able to trust people to exist in a society and coexist and be generally trustworthy. And so people who are like charlatans and, scamming people and doing things to defraud people just generally against other human beings, they're in this, the outermost of the fraud rings because that's, that still sucks because it's still going against God's wishes for humanity to be united and be able to trust each other. And like the good of humanity is like that we exist in a, that we coexist and that we all support each other in our journey to get closer to God's love, whatever. But it's not the worst because the worst of the worst of the worst is the people who get people to trust them and then betray them. So people like, so I think that Cain is in here because Cain's brother Abel trusted him as a brother and then he was murdered. And so that's like, the ultimate betrayal. Judas is down here. Judas, Jesus trusted Judas and Judas betrayed him. And so all of these like worst, evilest, most horrible people are down in this like bottom circle. And also the Pope who did Dante dirty and like was like, hey, come to my Pope house, like I want to have a cool party with you. And then after Dante left, Florence was like, just kidding, I'm gonna take over Florence and also you can't come back, bye. Is like,
that's where he goes.
Dante's pretty mad about all of that stuff. And
signed, sealed, delivered.
We can understand both on a spiritual, theological level and a personal level why and how Dante has structured this. So the whole point of this whole monologue is just for Dante to be like, see how smart I am, see how much I think about all this stuff and how it works together and like why I structured things the way I did. I didn't just make it random because I wanted to. Like I thought about this a lot actually. And it's really smart. So acknowledge that. Virgil thinks it's smart too. So.
Yeah, Virgil agrees with me. In fact, he told me. See, that's cool.
And I don't necessarily know that Dante was like super like pick me about it. I think that Dante was mostly just like I've thought about this a lot and I've thought about it in a lot of different ways. And I've like I think Dante just hyper fixated on it and thought about it and processed it and like couldn't ever stop thinking about it and spent hours and hours and hours kind of like thinking about how this works in his head. And it's like, this is it, guys. I got it. Like, this is how it's gotta work. Like, the only thing that makes sense. So.
This is kind of interesting. Like, I was reading an analysis of this specific chapter, and a lot of places, a lot of sources were saying like this is the only time Dante truly describes the geography and like the physical properties of hell that he's created, which it does bring an interesting question, like why did he wait until the 11th, I guess, why did he wait until this specific circle to give this kind of description, especially as you're saying, like there's probably a great level of obsession, great level of thought that went into constructing it, and it has been consistent so far. So it is interesting that he decided to explain it up until now. He didn't explain it.
Two things. In terms of narratively, basically, this is the first time that they've actually gotten to take a break. So Dante spent this whole time just like being scared and fainting and being stressed out and being pulled along as if compelled through hell. And like, this is the first time that they're like, we need to take a break here. And so they rest and they're like, okay, like Dante is working hard to create a dividing line between all those circles that came before, because Dante's like, well, these sins are bad and worthy of being punished, but these ones are the ones that like are somewhat understandable. They're like, whatever. And I need there to be a distinction narratively between like these sins, which are like bad, and these sins, which are like, these are really bad. So like part of it is creating that dividing line between that and like this and this, because even in all these circles, even in the last circle of the heretics, Dante has a lot of sympathy and compassion for them as humans, even though, as Virgil's convinced him, like, they deserve to be punished. But also it's like, you know, we're kind of like caught up in the like flow of the story, and we're just like pulled along and swept along, and now it's like we need to take a breath because we're about to go into these really deep dark circles, and like it's gonna be pretty bad. So all of that stuff was on Dante's mind as he was kind of figuring that out. And the other thing is that, along with my theory that Dante's neurodivergent, I think that Dante might have kind of gone in with this of like, well, I've thought about this and I've worked through this and processed it, so everybody knows. Like, I don't know if he had the perspective taking to realize until this point that like, oh, maybe I should explain my like internal workings to other people, because it's so obvious to me and I've been thinking about this whole time. But like, I guess maybe other people don't just spend like decades thinking about how hell is structured, I guess. Even though that's my hyperfixation, I guess maybe other people don't do that.
Well, people don't do it as their pastime. What, they have hobbies? What are hobbies?
Yeah.
See,
so I can imagine that this wasn't even in there until Dante had someone else read it, and then they were like, wait, what is this? What's happening?
You're so stupid, let me tell you.
And then Dante was like, oh, I'll throw in a monologue, don't worry.
I'll throw in a long monologue. I'm sure someone's gonna love reading this.
Dante's editor was just like, hey bud, like, none of this makes sense.
It's a bit long, isn't it? It's like, I don't know what's going on here. It's like, oh, you guys. I imagine he was pretty frustrated writing this whole thing.
I guess I'll spell it out then.
I guess I'll spell out for these idiots, because clearly this is the way it goes. I kind of love like his constant reference to nature, which like I'm an ignoramus in this sense. I don't know why. I don't know the context that nature fits in. Like, I guess like at the time, I'm sure Mother Nature was that some level of context. I mean, some level of idea that there was there was an idea of Mother Nature and nature is holy type thing, and I guess that's what he's referring to when he's constantly referring to nature.
I think we discussed this in one of the previous cantos. I can't remember which one it came up in, but basically, there's this idea that like God is all powerful, but kind of created these different entities, like kind of similar to when we were reading the Iliad. There were the Greek and the Greek gods, right? And they were like entities, and they were controlling these things. But then we also talked about like the river, for example, as an entity, or the wind, or nature, or I'm trying to remember which one specifically came up in the Iliad.
The river.
But there were these like not gods, but they were still like natural entities that like went and did their own thing, and they were like affiliated with the gods. It's kind of the same vibe where God was like, you know, I created nature, and nature's like has these like nature, fortune, things like that. They have these rules, and they like, you know, they're kind of like stewards of God's will in a way.
Like in this way, I actually do really see that. Like, I guess one way when I first heard it, the way it seemed like the nature is kind of the humanity of someone, at least the way it's written here, just because like the fraud would seem to kill only the bond of love which nature makes, which is like, I guess, two humans trusting each other is supposed to be some natural bond, and breaking that is, I guess, an act against God, because God created nature, or like God created our humanity. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and I think that like a lot of that is like, you know, there's this way that things are supposed to be. And so anybody that is committing a sin is doing something to
they're acting against nature
the way that they're not supposed to be. So if you're committing adultery, it's like, well, the way things are supposed to be are you're supposed to get married. You're supposed to be a virgin and then get married and then stay with that one partner and never like deviate from that. And that's like the right and just way. And that like, you know, is a very restrictive way of looking at what it means to be like supposed to be a human. But from Dante's perspective, like Dante was very black and white. So from Dante's perspective, it's like there is one right plan, and there is one right way to be a human, and there is one right way to do things, and if you do anything other than that, it's a sin. You go to hell.
A very dogmatic view.
And nature is one of those things that, like, nature has these rules, and nature does these things to, like, make things exist in the way that they're supposed to exist.
And you going against it is going against God. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because God was like, all right, nature, here's what I want you to do.
Here's what I
Go
want you
down
to
there,
do.
babysit everybody, like, make sure these things happen. Nature's like, okay, got it, I'm on it. And then all these, like, little humans are running around, like, doing things that nature is like, guys, stop, don't do that. Like, that's not what I said. And they're like, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to go have sex with my husband's brother. And God's like, all right, straight to hell, straight to hell. Time out the corner.
Time out, Jimmy. You're done.
I told you to listen to the babysitter, but
all right, Constantine.
Now you're grounded.
Yo, that's pretty cool.
Like eternally grounded.
You're eternally grounded.
In the ground.
In the ground.
In the ground.
I think, by the way, the childcare center at our amusement park should just be like nature. Nature.
Let them go.
Just nature. Just in nature. Just send them into the forest. Throw them in the forest.
Yeah.
I was internally processing the fact that if you had a daycare center at 666 Flags, that if the kids misbehave, you could just be like, hey, stop hitting Jimmy, otherwise you're going to the second circle of violence in hell.
Just
like force them to go on scary rides, and they're like, oh shit.
Oh, I thought we were just gonna.
Okay, but what if they like rides, and so then they misbehave on purpose?
Start beating up Jimmy.
Just gonna whoop Jimmy's butt.
For this line of thought. Okay, Dante replies. Dante is gonna, like, suck his own dick a little bit about how proud he is of this clear description of what hell is. So,
Teacher, thine argument proceeds most lucidly and full well classifies this deep abyss and those people.
God. He just referenced, wow, he just patted himself on his back.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
But tell me now, those of the muddy marsh, those whom the wind drives, those the rain beats down, and those that with such keen tongues meet each other, why aren't they perished in the red-hot town?
Not just people who make out.
Like, oh, those make-out boys.
Make-outers punished.
Make-outers. Make-out points.
If God be angry with them. If God be angry with them. And if not, why are they tortured in those several ways? Answer me that.
Good question. Answer me that, me.
and he to me.
Why doth thine intellect wander so far from that which is its wont, and doth thy mind intently gaze elsewhere? Hast thou no recollection of the words with which thine ethics treats extensively, the dispositions 3 which heaven rejects, incontinence and malice and insane bestiality?
What is this?
And how yes, Matt.
What?
I think we'll find out. And how incontinence offends God least, and hence receives least blame. If thou consider this opinion well, and then remember who those are above, that outside undergo their punishment, well, shalt thou see why from these wretches here they're set apart, and why less wrathfully vengeance divine is hammering on them there.
Hold up. Why did you just brush over the whole bestiality part? That was so out of left wing. So never referred to this.
Yeah, in this whole thing, Virgil's just like, are you dumb, dude? Like, think about the difference between those folks up there and these folks down here. Like, you know why God hates these things especially. So why wouldn't they be separate? And Dante's still confused, so he's going to respond.
O Son, that healest every troubled sight, thou so contentest me when answering questions that doubt, no less than knowledge pleases me. Return a little further back.
Said I.
To where thou sayest usury offends, goodness divine, and loose the tangled knot.
Philosophy.
I think it might be helpful to define usury because
Yeah, I know what that
I
means.
feel like it's stumping people.
It's
Yeah.
like to use.
I'm just gonna look up the definition. Hold on.
But you know what? I'm pretty tight about this whole in
Money
context.
lending. Yeah, so usury is money lending. So you get a lot of references to money lending in the Bible, and basically it's like you lend money with an exorbitant rate of extortion of interest. And so you like it's basically like pawn shops or like same day like
Student loans.
like paycheck loans, payday loans type of thing where it's like I'll lend you money if you give me a lot more money. And so when we're talking about usury, that's basically what we're talking about. God hates it.
Hates interest.
But it's not necessarily a word we use.
God hates banks, except when they're church.
So Dante's like, playing up Virgil really hard. Is like, oh, you're the best. I love you. I love it when you answer my questions, Daddy. Please keep telling me more knowledge. And like, I'm confused. Like, it's not that I don't know all this stuff, but I'm just trying to figure it out. And I have like doubt, and I like, it's not that I don't know. I'm smart. I know all this stuff. I'm smart, but like, just, I just have like doubts and stuff. So help me out. And now Virgil will help loose the tangled knot and explain why usury is so bad.
Loose it.
Philosophy.
Said he to me.
Points out to him that understandeth it, and not in one part only, that nature takes her course from the intellect divine, and from its art. And if thou note thy physics carefully, after not many pages shalt thou find that your art follows that as best it can, as the disciple, him who teaches. Hence, your art is grandchild, as it were, to God. From these two things, if thou recall to mind the first of Genesis, must people need obtain their livelihood and progress make. And, as the usurer takes another course, nature both in herself and in her follower he scorneth, since in something else he trusts. But follow me now, for I please to go, because the fishes o'er the horizon quiver, and wholly over Caurus lies the wain, and one descends the bank much further on.
Wow.
Okay. So Dante's like, I also want to know why God hates moneylenders so much. And basically what Dante's saying by that as the author is like, I hate moneylenders, and I'm going to tell you why God hates them too. Listen, here's the deal. Basically, Virgil says here that bitches got to get their money. Like, everybody's got to get paid to make their livelihood. But the way that nature wants things to go is that you work, you create things, or you do labor or whatever, you get paid, and therefore you have your livelihood. And that's the way that things should be. Users completely sidestep that. They're like, I see a better way around this. I'm just going to take money from other people who are doing that work. And that's why God hates it so much. So it's basically subverting the natural order of things. I do think that part of this is that Dante didn't necessarily think about where usury would go. Like, Dante hates usury because he sees it as really bad. And it like, Dante was in a like trading and artisan craftspeople city. So he really, really valued craftsmanship and artisanry and merchantry and things like that. So Dante loved capitalism. Dante was simping for capitalism hardcore. Capitalism, it went Beatrice, Virgil, capitalism. So
I like this new
Dante's like, people need to work and get money and like generate wealth and generate industry, and those are all good because that's in God's plan, and God's plan is perfect. And if you're a usurer, you're basically just taking money away from the people that are doing those things that God wants them to do, and so he hates it. And then Virgil makes reference to the stars here. He says the fishes, which is Pisces, over the horizon quiver. So the constellation Pisces is approaching the horizon, and wholly out over Charis lies the wane. So I think I'm going to be totally honest. I don't know what that means. I can look it up. But he's basically saying, like, if you look at the sky, we see like it's almost dawn, or like, time is passing, time has passed, and time is growing short, and so we should keep going. And we still have a ways to go before we go down to the next circle. So let's go. Like, stop asking me questions. Let's move on.
So you got your lecture, now shut up.
I gave you so much information. Like, Dante, you are a slut for information. I gave you so much, and you still want more.
I do like this new Dante image. Capitalist slut for information, Dante. This is quite phenomenal Dante image. I love it. Oh.
Okay, I tried looking up the chorus and the wane. So chorus is the west wind, and wane means a horse-drawn cart. A horse-drawn cart. So I'm willing to bet. I mean, possibly it's like, how the sun was driven by a horse-drawn cart, and it's like rising or setting. So it's like crossing the horizon.
So, the wane, or no, chorus. I don't know what the words mean, but it's talking about the chariot, and the chariot was, and that was Ursa Major. So basically, the Big Dipper that we see, they thought of that as a chariot. So they're talking about that constellation here.
Okay, so that's by the wind.
So
maybe that's going to the west. So like, time has passed.
So
all right. So the fishes of the zodiac, Pisces, are quivering on the horizon, and the wane lies to the northwest. In the time of the vernal equinox, when this book is taking place, and the sun is in Aries, Pisces immediately precedes the sun. So, like, Pisces shows up before the sun rises, about 4 a.m, and the part of Ursa Major called the wane. So there's a part of that constellation, the chariot, that's called the wane, which probably corresponds with has something to do with parts of a chariot that I don't know about, because I'm not a chariot mechanic.
You should do research, bro.
Like just a little bit less than 180 degrees away from Pisces. So basically it's like Pisces is here, Ursa Major is here, and so that's telling us like that the sun is going to be rising soon. So let's go.
Right. Can they see the stars from hell? Or is this just like Virgil just knows what time it is?
Hell's just got a great, like, clear sky.
That's a really good question. I have no idea.
Yeah, we're so focused on the ground of hell. What is the sky of hell like?
Yeah, because I imagine they're in like a cave, but now
I imagine like the Pixar clouds, like beautiful, gorgeous. Woody is walking.
Maybe it's like the Great Hall in Harry Potter, where the ceiling is just a sky.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool, but like, is that too cool for hell?
Too cool for hell.
Sinners don't deserve
Devil's
stars.
like, this is cool, but it's too cool.
I'm just like surprised that like in making hell they thought about that detail.
Did you think about this, Dante? It's a ceiling like Dante.
Sinners Don't Deserve Stars, by the way, is a great start to a Fall Out Boy title.
That's pretty solid. Pretty solid.
It's funny how like he took half this chapter explaining the geography of hell, and we're still like, wait, but can you see the stars though?
Yeah, but like, so what with the rocks? Like, we're talking like obsidian. Like, what was that? They would hate us. They would hate us with a passion. There was something interesting. I'm still kind of hung up on incontinence and malice and insane bestiality. It sounds like a really weird like cult slogan, like cult invite. Come over to our weird cult. We have incontinence.
And everybody's shouting incontinence, malice,
insane bestiality. Welcome to water country.
Okay, on that note, Like this video for some reason. I don't know why you would.
I don't know why you watch this. Thank you. I'm amazed that you do.
Allison, you're muted.
God. No. I said, you want to hear more Dante monologues? You want to hear Dante talking about how smart he is? Subscribe so that you can see all of our videos because he's going to do it at least one more time, I promise.
And ring that bell so that you get a notification.
A notification. Like, oh, it's teaspoons again. Oh, man. You know what? Only gets better from here on out. Trust.